So let's turn this evening, shall we then, for the first of our series of studies to the book of Job. And I hope by the end of this evening and tomorrow and Lord's Day morning, that Job will be one of the better fingered parts, as it were, of your Bible. The book of Job, it comes right before the Psalms. So the title we've given to our little series is Journey with Job. This evening, I want to read a verse or two here from Job and the first chapter. So Job chapter 1, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth, going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand, strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down in your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they're dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." "Skin for sin," Satan replied. "A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, he's in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Job replied, "You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And there we finish. And we pray God's special blessing on his word again this evening. Now, when we think about Job and the man, and indeed the book that is penned after him, I think it's probably one or two things that automatically spring to our mind. And the first one is this. Here is a story, and it's a true story of one man who had it all. And then, quite literally, out of the blue, within a handful of minutes, it was all gone. His family, his farm, and his fortune. He lost it all. Now, for you and for me, that is undoubtedly a catastrophic loss. But the second thing that automatically springs to mind is that we often hear people talking in conversation with one another, and they often refer to the patience of Job, don't they? You've heard that, and I have as well. And you know, friends, if we're absolutely honest, I think most of us are probably amazed at Job's perseverance in the worst of times. I mean, we stand back, we admire him for his stickability, for his endurance. And unknown to many people in today's world, men and women who stand on the sidelines and clap for Job. That wee phrase pops up in the Bible in James 5 and in verse 11, the patience of Job. Now, this is the oldest book in the Bible, and it may be one of the oldest books ever written. It's what we would say this evening. It's a very ancient book. In fact, so much of what we read in Genesis and Exodus isn't there in the book of Job in any shape or form. It actually predates Abraham, and it was probably penned somewhere between the Tower of Babel and the Call of Abraham. Now, when you read through the entire book of Job, and it's a challenging read, to be absolutely honest, do you know what you discover? Here is a broken man. He's a broken man with a broken heart. He's a man who is suffering. And the suffering that we have highlighted here is something that is, number one, it is immense. But then number two, it is also intense. But the book of Job is full of realism, isn't it? Because let's face it, dear friends, even you who are gathered here this evening, every one of us suffer at one time or another, and in one way or another. And let's come clean, dear friends, if we live long enough, you will suffer. There's no doubts about that. Why? Because life is fragile. And as the years roll by, guess what happens? We all begin to creak, don't we? And the cracks begin to appear. You know, I think the story of Job is one that is well worth reading. In fact, I was amazed to discover this. This was actually Martin Luther's favorite book, the book of Job. And writing about the book of Job, he said it was magnificent and sublime. Now, that said, the more you get into the book of Job, the more questions you probably have, flitting around in the front of your mind. Questions like this: where is God when life goes pear-shaped and it really hurts? How can we possibly worship God in times of trial and trouble? Does a God of love and tender mercy find pleasure in seeing his children hit rock bottom? When trials come, can I love God? Can I trust God? Can I build my life in God when he seems to have kicked away all the props in my life? When the chips are down, can I really adore the Lord? You see, dear friends, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind this evening that the book of Job is truly profound. It is most provocative, and it's certainly puzzling. It just seems to me that our friend Job is on a kind of a journey. It's a journey from where he is into the heart of God, into the inscrutable ways of God. You remember Paul wrote at the end of Romans 11, how unsearchable are his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Paul was right. William Cowper, one of the greatest hymn writers the church has ever known, he was a man who suffered greatly. In fact, he penned his last hymn in 1774. And this is what he wrote: God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. And then he goes on to say that God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. You see, dear friends, God doesn't always explain to you and to me, or to Job, why he does what he does. God doesn't always explain to you and to me when and where he does it, and indeed with whom he does it. But there again, when you're God, you don't have to. You don't need to. And that's what our friend Job just found so very frustrating. For him, it was quite nerve-wracking. It was so exhausting. If you like, you can see Job and he's banging his head against a brick wall. 10 minutes later, the wall is okay. But Job has a very sore head. That's exactly what you have right here. It's also true to say this evening, the brutal truth is that his God was on mute for most of the drama in these 42 chapters. My friend, when all hell broke loose, as it were, the heavens were as brass. The heavens were silent. Indeed, I think that's one of the take-home lessons for you and me this evening, a lesson that Job needed to learn, as do you and as do me. And it is this, that God is God. God will do as he pleases. And God will do that when he pleases. And God will do that with whom he pleases, without even taking a moment to consult without any one of us. But you know, friends, it's good to remember this evening, he will do so for his own glory. But he will also do it for the ultimate good of his people, like you and like me. I often think of it like this: God does what he does because God is who he is. You know, in this fairly short series of 5 studies on Job, I think the words of Bishop C. Ryle of Liverpool, a bygone era, they just seem so apt and so pertinent. The bishop put it like this: the grace of God exempts no one from trouble. And so what we have recorded here in God's word is an inspired old story. It's a story where grief and grace intersect. And so today we want to shine the torchlight on, in our first study, when bad things happen to good people. And then after we have a short break, we'll ask the leading question: what happens when we reach breaking point? And then in our middle study tomorrow morning, we'll probe a little bit deeper when we grapple with the question, with friends like that, Who needs ... And then in our penultimate study tomorrow, we will look at one man with a message entitled The Learning Curve of Life. And then in our final study on Lord's Day morning, we'll explore the wonderful truth at the end of the book, that God is bigger than all our problems. So turn back with me then, dear friends, to chapter 1. There are 4 main lines of thought in our study this evening. They're all fairly easy to remember. They all begin with the letter C. They should not all be coming up at the one time, but they are. Okay, all begin with the letter C, and the first one is Job's character. Job's character, and that's what you have in chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. You know, I read these words again this evening, and the chapter begins pretty much like the opening line. The scrolls across the screen, Star Wars. You remember what that is? A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. And so we read here in verse 1 of chapter 1, it's a classic one-liner. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. Now, bearing in mind, dear friends, all that follows in a 42-chapter biography, that opener is a huge understatement. But it does 2 things. It tells us who the man is, and then secondly tells us where he's from. So the man at the center of the story is a fellow called Job. He was around, as I said earlier, a very, very long time ago. Indeed, most evangelical scholars believe that Job actually lived before the time of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that goes a way, way back to the dim and distant past, way back to 2000 BC. And so in the timeline, in the grand scheme of things, that's 4,000 plus years ago. The land of Uz, well, that embraced a large geographical area east of the Jordan River, southeast of the Dead Sea, near what we would call today modern-day Jordan. So it tells me that Job is a real person and is living in the real world. Okay, now look at a pair of couplets down there also in verse 1, which give us a glimpse of his character. First of all, he was blameless and upright, and then he feared God and shunned evil. My dear friends, that's quite a testimonial, isn't it? By any stretch of the imagination. One commentator noted that his without was the same as his within. You see, here is a man of unimpeachable integrity, for that's the meaning of the word blameless. In other words, no one could pin anything on Job. There was no mud stuck on his back, as it were. Here is a man who was devoid of all kinds of sleaze in a murky world. You know, if the tabloids had been around in that day, they would have gone bust. You know why? Because there were no salacious front page stories about Job. Now, this guy was not sinless. No, he wasn't perfect. No. But I'll tell you what he was. He was above and beyond reproach. Blameless. Now, to say that Job was upright, that means that he was somebody who was as straight as a die. In other words, his life and his lifestyle in public and in private, they were on a level that quite literally pleased the Lord. His motivations were pure. His personal dealings in the wider community, they were marked by fairness and by honesty. Here's a man who could be trusted. Here is a man whose word was his bond. In fact, I'm sure many of you realize that Ezekiel lists Job, along with Noah and Daniel, as the most righteous men of all times. Ezekiel chapter 14. For my friends across the pond in the Americas, Job, as it were, is carved on the wall of the biblical Mount Rushmore. The third thing we discover here about him, he feared God. In other words, here is a man who was filled with holy awe. with reverence, respect for God. Here is somebody who took God seriously. Here is someone who was careful to live in a God-honoring manner. He was a spiritual man. He was a wise man. He's a man whose worship was right, a man whose thinking was right, and a man whose conduct was right. But then the final couplet there tells me he also shunned evil. He shunned evil. You know, that little phrase pops up many, many times in the Psalms and Proverbs, especially. In other words, Job turned away from evil. In other words, when faced with temptation, as he must have been, like you and like me, what did Job do? He ran away from it as fast as his wee legs would carry him. And you know, I just think it's important for you and I to realize that verse 1, it was not a eulogy spoken at a kind of memorial service for Job. No, you know what I mean, don't you? A memorial service, eulogies, isn't that what people say nice things about you when you're gone? But that's not exactly what you have right here. Job is very much alive at this point in time, and it's vital for you and I to grasp and keep in the front of our mind that Job is a good man, but is also a godly man. Take a look at verse 2, and we find he's also a family man. He's a family man. He and his wife had been blessed with 10 children, 7 sons, and 3 daughters. Now, I'm sure you probably realize that in the Bible, 7 and 3 are numbers of perfection. So we had, I suppose we could call it, a model family. But can you imagine it? 10 kids. I tell you, my friend, that's a lot of mouths to feed. And you can imagine the banter around the evening table when they were growing up in the farm. Family man. But then look at verse 3 with some idea of his phenomenal wealth. I mean, this guy was no Johnny come lately. He was a big time farmer. He was a land owner. In fact, the numbers recorded down there in verse 3, they are quite staggering. It's hard for you and I to get our head around them. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, and the list goes on and on and on. In fact, this guy was a hugely successful businessman with a glowing reputation far and wide. The Bible sees him down there at the end of verse 3. He was hailed as the greatest man among all people of the East. Well, that was between the rivers Nile and the Euphrates. And then if you look at verse 4 and verse 5, we get quite an insight there, don't we, into their family life. You know, there was nothing dysfunctional about this family. It's fairly obvious in reading what you have there in chapter 1. They obviously enjoyed each other's company. And guess what? The 10 of them, when it came to birthday time, they all met together for a bit of a ceilidh and a bit of a party. Wonderful time. But that says something, doesn't it? It says that they were a close-knit family. And it seems to me, dear friends, that Job's faith made a mega impact on the life of each of his kids. In fact, Job comes across as a good dad to each of his 10 children. But he's also a spiritual leader in the family home as well. You see, for Job, building a strong family, that was one of his priorities in life. You see what he did for them? Tells you down there. He was fulfilling the role of a kind of family priest. Sure, he prayed for them. He advised them. He led by example. But he did more, didn't he? What does the Bible tell us? He was the first one to show up at the altar at the crack of dawn. He was ready to offer a sacrifice for each one of them, just in case they had sinned during their big birthday celebratory bash. My friend, that's the caliber of man we're talking about here this evening. Rather than holding his family with a clenched fist, Job offered his family up to God with an open hand. You know, I read these first 5 verses, and I come away, as it were, riding on the crest of a wave. It's feel good, isn't it? We're on top of the world. Life is hunky-dory. But you know, it won't last. And it didn't last because the dark storm clouds are gathering. And if these first few verses say anything to you and me this evening, it just seems that Job sunned himself in the unclouded favor of a faithful God. There is a man, we speak highly of his character. But if you cast your eye down to verse 6 to verse 12, here we come across Job's colluders, his colluders. And you see how things change ever so quickly down there in verse 6. Did you notice that? Angels were doing what angels do as the servants of God. They were simply reporting back, having been out in some mission for God. Or they may have been there in God's presence, awaiting orders for their very next assignment. It's a bit like when the colonels meet with a general to discuss their tactics and then to receive their final directions. The angels are there. But did you notice they're not alone? Did you see who appears alongside them? It's not just Satan. The Bible actually has in there the Satan, because Satan isn't his name, it's his title. The name actually means one who accuses, one who attacks. He is the antagonist. He is a slanderer. My friend, you read that little section, you think to yourself, what is going on right here? The Satan, he's the one you'll remember, I'm sure, who was kicked out of heaven. Remember that? At one time, he was number one in the angelic pecking order. And then he got too big for his boots. He had his heart set on being God. And so he was banished from heaven for his wanton rebellion. And from that day to this, he became known as the prince of the power of the air. Now, when we talk about this Satan this evening, let me be ever so clear. He's no friend to the people of God. He never has been, and he never will be. He is our adversary. I don't like to give him credit, but he is no fool. He knows his way around. In fact, we see that, don't we, in his honest answer to the Lord's question down there in verse 7. Where have you come from? My friend, for once in his life, the father of lies, as Jesus called him, actually told the truth. You see what he said? From roaming throughout the earth and going back and forth in it. Now, does that not ring a bell? Because something similar pops up in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, doesn't it? You see, Satan is a world traveler. He's a seasoned campaigner. Here's one who is pacing planet Earth and is preying upon unsuspecting victims. Beloved friends, he's out to get you and he's out to get me. And I think it's time for you and I to wake up in 2023 to the fact that Satan is the vulture who claims to be a mockingbird. You know, Satan probably couldn't believe his luck when the Lord said to him down there in verse 8, ever thought about going after Job? He's a man of integrity. And guess what? He had. For he reckoned that Job was only in it for what Job could get out of it. Yeah. And so long as God blessed him, all was okay. And Job would shout, hallelujah, praise our God. But if Job was reduced to zero, stripped of everything, then Satan reckoned it would be an all too different story. And my friend, read the narrative, but that's when the sovereign Lord gave Satan the green light to pursue Job. He could do anything he wanted, but he had to keep his fingers off the man himself. And even for you and I this evening, the timely lesson is this, that Satan can go so far and no further. He can do so much and no more. The parameters are set. It was true back then. It is certainly true even today. And the great news for Job and for you and for me is that Satan can't touch a hair on the back of a camel that belongs to Job until he has divine permission. Why? Because God is sovereign. So we think about Job's character and Job's colluders. The third thing we want to think about this evening in verse 13 to 19 are Job's calamities, his calamities. You know, there's a chilling, blood-curdling statement there at the end of verse 12. For this is what we read. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. He sure did. He has a license to wreak havoc stuffed in his back pocket. He was like a teenager who just got his driving license. And my friend, within a single day, all hell broke loose. We read it together, didn't we? In the space of a few hours, we have a catalogue of catastrophes. It went from bad to worse, and still some. It is a litany of disaster. It just snowballed like an avalanche of woe cascading over Job. It was blow after blow after blow, and Job was reeling. First of all his oxen and donkeys were destroyed. And then all his sheep were destroyed. And then the final straw, all his camels were destroyed. Every piece of his livestock, everything, along with all his servants, all gone. All gone. All that is, except for 3 traumatized individuals who ran off to inform Job and break the tragic news to him. And my friends, when you thought it couldn't get any worse, another servant rushed in and broke the news to Job that every parent dreads. His entire family of 10 children were struck down by some kind of tornado. The building they were in collapsed like a pack of cards, snuffing out their lives like an extinguished candle. I can tell you, my friends, nothing and no one can ever prepare you for such devastating news as this. Now, some of us know what it's like to experience the loss of one child. But even that pales into insignificance when we see what happened to Job. I mean, his grievous sense of loss is impossible for you and I to fathom. And you know what? It all happened within 24 hours. How tragic is that? In one fell swoop, Job was stripped of fortune and family. His faith was T-boned, as it were. He was left in an emotional whirl. Here is the man who was the richest man around when the sun came up and when dawn broke that day. But before the day was out and the sun had sunk in the west, he was wiped out, left with nothing but memories. And before him, 10 freshly dug graves. And remember, dear friends, he was a good man. He was a man with an impeccable track record. A reminder to you and me presently that there are times in your life and mine when bad things do happen to good people. Beloved, godly people do suffer. And you know, it gets a million times worse, doesn't it? When you go into the 2nd chapter, when Satan goes on the rampage, on the attack another time, and Job's health is severely impacted. The Bible says in verse 7, he is sores from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. My friend, the man's in agony. He's crushed. He's dazed. He's disoriented. Then to add fuel to the fire, his dear wife then turns against him when she tells him, Job, curse God and die. My friend, That's tough. It's bad enough when other people turn against you, but you don't want it, and you don't need it from your nearest and dearest. My heart goes out to Job. Poor man. Okay. Before we criticize her too much, let's not forget that she was grieving too. She was the mother of those 10 bairns. She's seen their entire livelihood and the family homes go down the drain. And one of the lessons we have right here, dear friends, is that different people grieve in different ways at different times. When it comes to grief, it's not a case of one size fits all. His character, his colluders, his calamities. And then finally this evening, we see something of Job's confidence, his confidence. You know, we catch a glimpse here, don't we, of Job's intense sorrow, distress. He shaves his head, he tears his robe. I mean, the man's heart is in turmoil, and his mind is in shock with all of this happening to him. Job received what he didn't want, and he wished for that which he didn't get. I tell you, that is suffering in one line. But then the most amazing thing happened next, doesn't it? In verse 20 to 22, when Job just falls to the ground in worship. I mean, that is nothing short of amazing. And you see what he says. He spans the years from the womb to the tomb. And Job recognized he came into this world empty-handed, and he'll leave it in the same way, naked, stark naked. Job, in those final couple of verses, acknowledged the sovereignty of God in all the affairs of his life. Even though the unthinkable had happened to him, he knew that God was in full control. He spoke movingly of God's providential dealings with him. He said, God gave, but then God has taken away. And then we see Job's heartfelt aspiration for the name of the Lord to be praised. Oh, you see, my friends, even in this tough trial, he wanted the Lord to be glorified. So what have we done? We've moved from accusation to agony to adoration. And I think it's worth noting this evening that in the final verse, at no time did Job blame God for this horrendously terrible calamity. You know, my friends, we can still worship God, even when we don't understand what's going on. We can still worship God, even when you and I can't make any sense of it all. You can still have faith, even when you're floundering. You know, I think it would have been so easy for Job to point the finger at his God, but he didn't do it. He was tested like none of us ever will be. Oh, yes, bad things do happen to God's good people. But then think about what happened to Jesus. Faultless, blameless, sinless. Think about what happened to him when he went all the way to Calvary on our behalf. And my friend, for you and me, I think this book teaches us that a good man isn't given immunity from the hiccups and the hurdles of life. There's no guarantee that you and I will have a smooth crossing on the sea of life. In fact, the chances are for every one of us, it'll be fairly stormy at times. But the good news is we'll have a safe landing on the other shore. And so remember this, in all the changing scenes in your life and in mine, there will be times, for reasons best known to him and only known to him, when he allows some features in our lives to be bent out of shape. There is, my friend, in every one of our lives, To quote the Scottish preacher Thomas Boston, a crook in our lot. So, beloved friends, when life disintegrates around you and all you have are shattered dreams and a mix of bent and broken pieces, trust him. Trust him like Job, for he will hold you fast. May God help us to do just that. Amen.